Next level. Next level.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Yeah, that is just some old stuff, Nate, from, well, it's not that old. It's about a week or two. A couple consoles that were brought in that I won't be repairing for obvious reasons. A little do-it-yourself there on the PS4 and Xbox One S, I think it was. Anyways, what's going on? This is Mike from Go Cell Phone Repair, and tonight we're going to be talking about the world's first foldable phone, if you want to call it that. It is foldable, and I think you can make phone calls with it, but it's not from Samsung, yet it is the world's first foldable phone available today. Also, how to avoid the notch with a full screen phone. One company came up with an interesting way to go about that. We are like robots on the production line, says a student working at the Apple Watch factory, and no one was surprised, I'm sure, on that one. FCC claims that community broadband, Mike, can you not spell? Broadband threatens the First Amendment. Apple to begin repairing some legacy phones. Boy, I really got sloppy with the keyboard there today, didn't I? Tim Berners-Lee proposes breaking up some large tech companies. Let's get started right after this. And I went right into the screen. I don't know what's going on today, friends. Everything got rearranged on here. I did fix the typos up here, but the ones on the first screen are all jacked up. So, yeah, in the beginning there, I had actually used that intro for last week when I had to abort or restart the stream because of low stream health, and now I'm getting the same message from YouTube. It looks like I still have audio, so I don't know, guys. I don't know what to do with this. Every time I do something on YouTube, whether it's a live stream or watching something on my smart TV, that seems to be the only service that I have problems with, which is very strange. I don't know. I'm going to start running this stuff through a VPN or something and see what's going on with it. Dude, I got a DIY PS4 call today too. Man, I don't know where, you didn't even see all of that mess. I'm going to make a video, I think, later on to show you, but someone tried to do it yourself on this. As you can see, they kind of just ripped the whole HDMI port off of the board. They had a big gouge into the first layer on the PCB. There was a whole bunch of stuff that looks like it got burnt up. And on top of that, there was thermal paste everywhere. Like if the processor was this big, the thermal paste went out about this wide, and it was just like splattered all over the place. And on top of that, it looks like they added a couple of washers. If you know the two long screws that go in right behind the processor with that one kind of oval shaped piece that holds it down, it looks like they went to the hardware store and bought some washers and added them in under there. So there's actually more pressure, I think, now on the processor chip. So I don't know what was going on with that, but I had to say no because, you know, long story short, when you're looking at something obviously like a PS4, how much money does someone want to put into that, especially if they can just swap the hard drive into another unit? So the customer decided that they did not want to proceed with the repair. And that, of course, is after you've got, 15, 20 minutes into taking it apart and putting it back together. So that's kind of a bummer. The Xbox One S, as you saw, was just a nightmare. They ripped almost every single pad off of where the pins connect to the board. So that one, I told them the price was going to go up dramatically, and they also declined that. Which, again, it's a bummer. It would have been an easy fix, but had someone not taken a blowtorch to it or whatever it was that they used to remove that old port, and now it's just done. So sometimes that happens. It says, looks good. Thank you. That's what I wanted to make sure of because I hate to go too far into this and then find out that the stream isn't even working. So we got Joshua Fitzpatrick, Nate's Tech Services, and I don't know who else because whoever else is watching, I haven't seen your name pop up there. But thanks everyone for joining tonight. I wanted to go over a couple things that I thought you might find interesting that are happening in tech right now. One of them is this. It is the Samsung Galaxy foldable phone just got beat. So remember, Samsung's been talking about putting out a foldable phone forever, and they seem to be the most excited about it. I haven't heard any buzz on the street, or anywhere else where people are going, hey, I can't wait until I get a foldable phone. But this has kind of been the case for a long time. And I was talking to someone about this earlier today. It's strange that there haven't been too many real breakthroughs in handset technology for a long time. And when I say that, what I mean is, if we look at the iconic brands, for example, Apple, FaceTime was a big deal, right? That was a game changer. That was a big feature that people actually used on a regular basis. Wireless charging, that was a big deal when Samsung came out with it, 6 years ago or whatever it was, because people didn't have to plug wires in anymore. What's another good one? When Apple decided to add a flash to their camera, remember they had the 3G and the 3GS with no camera flash forever? Like, how are you supposed to use a phone with no flash if you're in a dark setting? They added that on. That was a big deal. Foldable phone, I haven't heard a lot of people getting excited about it, but here it is. And, nowadays I think it's more about being able to say we did it first, whether anybody likes it or not. We came up with the technology. Face ID, yeah, I guess a lot of people use that. I don't know. I certainly don't. So the Royole, I don't even know how this is pronounced, R-O-Y-O-L-E, or Royole, Flexi Pi, is the world's first foldable smartphone. And well, first of all, it's massive, okay? There is a video that you can watch. If you follow the link down in this video's description, there's an article about it. It's on slashgear.com. And they have a couple different things. They have a still image here where you can see it sitting on a table. And then they also have a video where someone is holding it, and playing around with it, which I can't play because it's a YouTube video, so I'll get in trouble if I do that. But you can certainly check that out. And then down below here, they have their official advertisement for it, which makes it look pretty cool. Although I gotta say, kind of bulky. I mean, this thing is pretty thick when you look at it. So again, the question is there someone out there really waiting to have a foldable phablet or whatever you like to call it? I haven't heard that there's a demand, but maybe when this thing launches, people will get excited, which is today. This is the first day that it's available. And it says it uses a version of Android called Water OS, which was developed by this company specifically for the device. It has a dual view camera mode. Anyone out there, tell me if you understand what this means. There's a dual view camera mode, both sides of the folded device. So if you take this thing and you fold it in half, here's the crazy thing. The display is on the outside, which seems totally counterintuitive to me. You know, if I was going to have a phone that's all display all over the place and I could fold it in half, I would think that you'd want to do that to protect the display on the inside. Well, this one folds out so the display wraps around the outer edges, which means if you drop the phone, it's almost definitely landing on some part of the screen. But if you have a flexible display, I guess that's not going to be a problem. So here's the question. Both sides of the folded device will show a view of the other side, both with forward-facing cameras. So if I understand this correctly, you've got this phone, you fold it in half, you see the same image on both sides. It says it will show a view of the other side with both forward-facing cameras. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I don't understand what that means exactly. They have some pictures of it here that I guess are showing what it does somewhat. Anyways, flash sales of the device begin today, November 1st, 2018. Further sales will commence in December, and of course, you probably cannot buy this phone in the US now, and I would imagine maybe not ever. That's usually the way it goes when some smaller company that isn't already established here in the States launches a product. But if you're in China, which it looks like it looks like China and or Europe will probably be a couple of the markets where it's available. Some of the information came from Weibo or whatever this is. This is a Chinese blogging site. So I would assume that this will be available in China. Don't forget to click like. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, you guys, if you like this, please just hit the like button. It's easy. It's painless. And for anyone who doesn't, I'm sure you're not here listening anymore. So for the rest of you, I certainly appreciate it. And I know, hey, if it were me, I would have to be reminded as well. I always forget that kind of stuff. So I definitely want to support people on YouTube that I enjoy watching, and I hope that you will do the same. Think screen swaps are a nightmare now. Hold my beer. This is what I was going to get to, Joshua. With this phone, with this thing, you know, if something like this catches on, and we have a foldable display that goes all the way around both sides. I don't know this for sure, but I predicted a long time ago, a folding screen has to have two major components built in under that display, right? There's got to be a huge battery, and there's got to be a motherboard, and we would assume that those two are going to be in separate sections, right? Because if we look at phones proportionately, they're about 50-50. Sometimes the batteries takes you up even more space than a motherboard does, and in fact, in many cases, it takes up a significantly larger amount inside the case, and it also weighs quite a bit more because we still have lithium-ion technology that is, you know, considering the evolution of batteries, it's almost come to a standstill, it seems like. You know, it's like they've optimized them as far as they can go. So the only way to get more battery standby is to build a bigger battery. And of course, with PCBs, you know, we're getting to the point where motherboards can be a lot smaller. So I wonder if they might even have batteries on both sides of this thing. When it comes to doing the repair, you would assume that there's got to be a flexible cable that goes from the display to the motherboard. I would think on the same side of the device that it's located in it, right? So you'd have a cable that plugs in right under the screen into the motherboard, and then on the opposite side, you'd probably have a battery. But as far as opening this stuff up, taking it apart and putting it back together, yeah, that will remain to be seen. But the other thing about this is that they don't say, at least in this article, what this thing is going to cost, which is another big question. What are replacement parts going to look like? No idea. Now, I've never heard of this company before, Royal. So I don't know if they're relatively new or, you know, what kind of financing they have, but how much money are they actually putting into the screen? That's another good question. I'd like to see more specs on this thing, and I'm sure that we will pretty soon. Boo, this foldable phone is weird. I feel that it doesn't fold 360 degrees like those folding hinge laptops. Well, check out the video and let me know what you think. To me, it looks bulky. It looks like they had to make this thing extra thick for some reason, which, you know, it's cool that it folds in half, but if it ends up being as thick as, you know, a few 100-page book, then I don't know if that's going to go, if it's really going to catch on. It could just be another fad. But the fact that Samsung's going to be making one is interesting. Taco Bell phone. There you go, Johnny. The taco phone. That's perfect. Virtual transparency. Apparently, the FCC is a pain to deal with. Yeah, I would imagine. Oh, we'll get to more of that pretty soon. Does the foldable screen technology mean wallet-shaped phones? Kind of. It looks that way. When a customer changes his mind midway into the repair, does that mean the technician has to solder back the faulty components? I got stories for you on that one. So we've all run into this, and that's actually a very good question, Johnny. A lot of times we will start a repair and run into a couple things. I wouldn't say frequently, but on occasion, you start out with a repair that looks simple, like a screen repair, and then you find out there's something else wrong inside the phone. And yeah, how far did you go up till that point before you were aware that there was another problem? Because if the display is broken, obviously you have to plug another one in, and that's not a major undertaking, but there are situations where you think you have something simple like, here's a good one. Let's say you think that a customer needs a battery replacement on their iPhone, and for most of us, getting those little adhesive strips off from behind the old battery aren't always 100% successful. You go through that, pull the battery out, and then find out it's not the battery that's the problem. I mean, that's one example, which is another good reason to plug in a secondary battery before you remove the old one. But that's not always an option. Again, when you look at these game consoles, and sometimes you think you're dealing with a broken HDMI port, and people aren't always forthcoming about what happened to that device before they brought it to you, or they bought it used and thought they were getting a great deal, and come to find out there's all sorts of other problems on the inside, and you've already invested your time and energy into taking the thing apart. So depending on what you're looking at, it's an area where I recommend, if you know that you're going to invest more than 10 or 15 minutes of your time into something and you don't know the outcome for sure, that's when you start with a bench fee and you say, look, we're going to fix this. If this is the problem, which we think that it is, but if we're not 100% sure, we have to dig further. And at that point, you've got to be compensated for your time somehow, right? So if I put 30 minutes into something and I figure out what the problem is and the customer declines the repair, then I'm out 30 minutes of my time, and that's 30 minutes I could have spent fixing something. Now, granted, these situations aren't that frequent unless you have a reputation for doing things at no cost, no matter what, until the repair is completed. Because in that situation, you're going to have a lot of other people sending business to you that they don't want to deal with. But in most cases, it's fairly reasonable to let people know that if we have to spend 20, 30 minutes trying to figure something out, we have to be compensated for our time. And I found most customers to be reasonable about that. And, most of the time they'll even volunteer and say, well, absolutely, I'm going to pay you for your time. In fact, there have been situations where I go, listen, this can't be fixed. I took a look at it, no charge, don't worry about it. And they said, no, look, I understand business. You had to spend time on it. I appreciate it. Let me pay you for it. So if you desolder something and you realize that the problem can't be fixed, that is a good question, because at that point I think that you've kind of gotten to the point where you understand what the odds of the outcome are. I would think, most of the time you can kind of observe and see what's going on. In the case of an HDMI port, if you see that all the pins were pulled off, before you even take the port out, you're going to say, we're going to have to run some jumpers on here. There's a missing filter, or something else is down. There's a diode right next to the PS4 HDMI port that loves to come off when people overheat them. So if I have to replace that, I've got to pull it off a donor board. And in that case, I would say, if we find anything worse than this, I still have to charge you for it. Even if the console has other damage, and I go through the time and the steps that are necessary to replace an HDMI port on a PS4, disassemble, pull out the old port, put a new one in, put it back together, plug it in, and find out there's another problem that maybe the customer doesn't want to fix, then yeah, sorry, I got to be compensated for that. We certainly never want to put anyone in a situation where they feel like they're gambling. That's what I try to avoid. I don't want to tell someone, look, here's what it's going to cost you either way, regardless of the outcome, and odds are 50-50. That's a bummer. But if that's what it is, we definitely want to communicate that up front. And again, I find that most customers are very reasonable about accepting that. If I go in to have my car looked at and I don't know what the problem is, and the mechanic has to spend 15 minutes trying to figure it out, and then he says, hey, it's going to cost way more than this worth to fix, then obviously I expect to pay them for the time, the energy, the liability, the overhead that they have as a business that they invested into figuring out what my problem was. And most of the customers I believe that you want to do business with understand that concept. People that don't want to pay for anything are people that you're going to have a difficult time profiting from when you do business with them. And I'm fine with that. You know, if someone does not like to spend money, if they're allergic to spending money, I'm okay with sending them to someone else. You know, I'm happy to give people value for their money. But if you have someone who's just trying to, you know, say, okay, I want you to figure out the problem. Now I don't want to pay for it. I'll take it somewhere else and tell them what the problem was. Yeah, we can't do that. Can't let that happen too often, or you won't be in business long. Tonight I got a nightmare trying to change a fog light bulb. Oh, wow. What was that, on a car? What about supercapacitors? Don't kill yourself with them, I guess. Be careful. Know how to discharge a capacitor before you start fooling around with any of the larger ones. You know, obviously when we're dealing with phones and these kind of things, we can't do a whole lot of damage if we happen to bridge those together, but a larger capacitor can certainly hurt you. So if you don't know how to discharge a capacitor, don't work on, well, what uses them anymore? Old tube TV sets and stuff like that. But there are appliances out there that can hurt you if you're not familiar with how they work. Lenovo showed off something like this years ago. I wonder what happened to that. Oh, you found it. Cool. Was that alongside the yoga models? What? Oh, the advertisement? The Folio tablet isn't a true folding display because of the hinge in the middle. Yeah, and someone was saying something similar about the Samsung device that they're coming out with also not being exactly a foldable phone because I think it has two displays or something like that. In any case, I don't know about this whole thing. We shall see. It's definitely not on my list. I'm okay with the smallest. Really, I'm thinking about going to a smaller phone, honestly. I picked up my iPhone 7 today because I've been using the 8 Plus. Man, it just feels so much more comfortable in my hand. And I don't watch movies on my phone or anything like that, so whatever. Personal preference, right? So next here, I thought you would all want to see this. It says, it's kind of brilliant how this dual screen smartphone avoids the notch. Are you ready for this? Okay, should I do the save you a click thing here? So there's a phone or a company called Nubia, which is partially owned by ZTE, which means we'll probably never see this phone in the US either. But, you know, this big controversy about the notch. Should we have a notch? Should we not have a notch? Does anybody care? It's ugly. I can't stand it. I like it. I want another one. Everybody else wants to jump on the bandwagon. Well, these guys said, how about we just make an edge-to-edge display without a notch in it? Well, how do you take care of the front-facing camera? Well, they solved the problem by putting the selfie cam, or they solved the problem of where to put the selfie cam on an all-screen phone. Simply flip the phone around and use its rear camera and a 5.1-inch secondary 1520 by 720 OLED screen on the back to frame up your shot. So there you go. You don't need a front-facing camera. All you need is a rear-facing display that shows, basically, it's a front-facing camera on the rear side of the phone. This one I actually understand. So you got a display here on the back, along with the main camera. Whoops, sorry about that. You got your main camera here, display on the back. You take your selfies this way, done. You take your regular photos this way, done. The front of your screen has an edge-to-edge display, and you don't have to cut any holes in it. Kind of makes sense, and yet I still feel like it won't catch on, at least here, only because we don't get too much of anything from ZTE. Not so notchish. Is wireless charging truly wireless charging? Are hoverboards truly hoverboards? If Samsung comes out with a folding phone, it should be able to fold like they made concept videos of. Yeah, here's the thing. If you probably noticed already, we have begun to redefine many terms in this day and age. We even have people who would say that there's such a thing as an alternate truth. You know, so when you say facts, you may not even be talking about the same thing that someone else is. When you say truth, you may not. People's definitions vary now. So when we talk about folding phones, I would submit to you that in 1995, Motorola was claiming that they would make a credit card sized phone. Well, obviously, when you think of a credit card sized phone, you think of a credit card, right? And in fact, what they were referring to was the MicroTac Lite, which was far from being a credit card sized phone. You know, I thought you could maybe slip this thing in your wallet and you could fold it up inside. That's not what they had in mind. And as you pointed out here, real world, a lot of times when people say foldable or notchless or wireless or anything else, it's kind of like unlimited, right? You get unlimited data up to 2 gigabytes, and then you don't get unlimited data anymore. So with that in mind, I would say it's fair to accuse these companies of not saying exactly what something is, but at the same time, I think we have to recognize that they're going to keep doing it, you know, especially if it gets attention. So yeah, not really a foldable phone. Maybe, maybe not. Again, depends on your definition, I suppose. Depends on your definition of truth. Sounds like we can get a 4K 60 FPS front camera videos a lot quicker than we thought with this phone, assuming they put a Snapdragon 845 or better in this Nubia. And this was one of the impressive things about this phone. Let me get down here to the specs and I'll back up. So they do use a Snapdragon 845, 6 or 8 gigs of RAM, depending on the model that you choose, up to 128 gigabytes of storage, which I'm a big fan of. I like my storage on my phone. I don't like my stuff in the cloud. I want access to it now without having to pay for data or worry about having reception. And a sizable 3800 milliamp hour battery, which I think you're going to need when you have two separate displays. Now, one of the things that they pitched here, stop playing the video. Don't do that. Can't do that. One of the things that they pitched here was that you could put a like a screensaver on the back of the phone. So you've got your phone on this way, and on the back you've got some sort of design, some kind of logo, maybe, I don't know, some kind of image or something, or even something that's moving on the back, which again, now you're running two displays, which to me seems kind of silly. I hope that there's an option in this thing to turn off the rear display, because if they're not, imagine the battery consumption from two separate displays running at the same time. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And yet this is kind of what they're touting, is that you can put your your personal message on the back of the phone or something like that. So decent specs, but yeah, I think that we're going to see a little battery drain on this. It does also have an in-fingerprint reader, similar to the ones on the OnePlus 6T and the Huawei Mate 20. So again, beating Samsung and a lot of other companies, apparently, according to this article, when it comes to those two features. You can always install an ad blocker, which will give you the option. Oh, sorry, I'm reading someone else's conversation here. Hey, Aristine Iliador. I do. I will. I actually put a link for that in last week's stream, or sorry, not last week's, Monday's stream, and I will add it to the stream down here after this one is over, also, for sure. Facts are what obvious to everybody. Truth is what everyone makes sense of the facts. You can always install an ad blocker. Johnny, I'm wondering where your comment came out of context there. Anyways, yeah, so this looks kind of cool. If you're in China or somewhere else that has this, I'd love to see the review, but I don't think I'll be doing one, unfortunately, on that. However, let's move on here to Apple and their new labor scandal, if you want to call it that. We are like robots. Apple investigates Chinese factory using forced student labor. Shocker, I know. Apple once again making the most of their money by hiring people to work probably for less than they would be able to here. I think I can safely say that. So a labor rights group said the tech giant supplier forced students to work like robots to assemble the Apple Watch, which they're making plenty of money on. I would imagine. I would think. It's just my truth, my opinion. Many were compelled to work in order to get their vocational degrees and had to do night shifts, according to an investigation by Hong Kong-based NGO Students and Scholars Against Corporate Misbehavior, otherwise SACOM, which I didn't even know was a thing. That's kind of cool. It says that they worked under the guise of, quote, internships. So you know how that works. You bring someone in, you want cheap labor, and you say, we're going to make you an intern, which basically means you get paid next to nothing, and the company that hires or brings those interns in gets pretty close to free labor. And it says, according to one of the students, that our graduation certificate will be withheld by the school if we refuse to show up, which is pretty messed up, I think. Apple has sold watches, millions of Apple Watches, which can cost up to $1,499, which is why I'm not replacing the screens on those myself. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm not messing with Apple Watches for the most part. We repeat, who is this? This is the 18-year-old student representing or affiliated in some way with SACOM. We repeat the same procedure for hundreds of thousands of times every day like a robot. Others said they were put on the night shift working from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. with minimal breaks, according to SACOM. I don't know what that means exactly. Sounds like another company here that operates in the U.S. I wish they would have said, what minimal breaks are. They don't really give us any numbers on that one. The NGO demanded Apple investigate and bring the labor practices in line with the firm's own policies and those of the local and central Chinese government. So that's interesting. And I wonder if anything will actually change because of this. Last time they had people jumping off the roof at the Foxconn factory. They installed some nets so they couldn't jump off the roof anymore. So I don't know what they'll do about this. It'll be interesting to hear. Even internships has to be remunerated. It looks like he does on the top right. I'm not sure what you guys are talking about, an ad on my channel or somewhere else, on a video probably, I would imagine. So I'm really curious. This doesn't surprise us too much. Obviously, and I won't completely fault Apple because they probably don't have the type of oversight for these factories that they would if they were operating in the U.S. But the question is there going to be any change in the labor practices in China? Assuming that we don't stop getting products from China, or they become so heavily tariffed that it doesn't make sense to buy them from overseas anymore, or is this just another story that we'll read about and people will say, oh yeah, that's terrible. Now I'm going to go get in line and buy my next iPhone or Apple Watch next time, because there is an argument on one side that says it's bad to have outsourced labor where people are getting paid ridiculously low wages. And one of the arguments on the other side is that yes, but in many cases they are thankful to have any sort of wages, because if it wasn't for that job, they would have zero income. And I'm not saying that justifies it, but that's one of the things that people often bring up, is that yes, when we outsource things overseas, the labor is cheaper. It's not the same as the standards that we have here in North America, and probably in a lot of parts of Europe and the rest of the world. But what is the alternative? Because if they paid a decent wage, then they probably wouldn't be outsourcing this work. So where would that leave the people who are actually doing the labor? Again, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just questioning, what the alternative is. How do we change it? Do we just raise prices on products so that they can be compensated? And it's encouraging to see that China is stepping in and saying something about it. So it's not just pressure from Apple customers saying, hey, you guys need to make sure that you're paying people that put these things together a decent wage. There's actually an organization in China that has a standard for labor practices, NGO, and they are demanding that Apple investigate this. Somehow I have a feeling that if Apple said no, they would still be doing business with Apple. But who knows? This might change something. Anything is possible, right? Now with all the tariff thing, all the products coming from China ends up with the same price tag that the domestic manufacturer counterparts, which sucks for those who want to find more economical alternatives. Speaking of the devil, sorry, I'm reading these out of order, I know. Speaking of the devil, has anyone caught wind of Apple Watch's 4th generation getting bricked by the latest watch upgrade? No, but I think I have another Apple thing here that's kind of interesting. I'll get to that in just a second. So, yeah, that's my question, Johnny, and this is the funny thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand, and that is that tariffs affect us. It affects what we pay for products. It's not like we're saying, okay, China, you have to put some more of your money into the U.S. economy. It's us saying that when you import something from China, now the end users, the consumers, us, get to pay more for the product because there is some sort of tax that is assessed to these imported goods. So anyone who got excited, which is hard to imagine, but anyone who got excited about the fact that we're putting tariffs on imports, I hope that by now they understand how this works. This is not something that you put into place to help the population. Where is that money going? I don't know. Probably to fund more government organizations which will police the tariffs that are put onto these imported goods. But it's certainly not going into our pockets. It's money that we have to spend more of to get the same stuff that we've been buying historically. So I feel like everyone forgot about what tariffs were for a long time, because we really didn't have anything, in the news. Nothing was going on, and all of a sudden we get this idea that we're going to put tariffs on things, and people thought that was a good thing for some reason. I'm not even joking. I've heard people think, yes, it's about time we start charging tariffs. Well, you know what that means, right? It means you have to spend more money on stuff if it's imported. And if not, like we said, if you move the manufacturing to the U.S., obviously everything goes up, from the property to the wages to workers' comp to everything you can imagine. Overall, everything goes up. So that means the product costs more money. It doesn't mean the company is going to make more. It means the cost of production is higher, so they have to charge more to make the same margin. Anyways, yeah. I say that since we don't have supplier alternatives for electronic parts other than those coming from China, that they have to put an exemption regarding these field. That is an interesting point, and I wonder what will happen, if all this stuff stays in place and we do have to start paying a lot more for parts that are imported, and if we start having customs and it's ICE, and there's one other organization or government 3-letter deal that watches over imports. What if they start to confiscate everything that comes in if it's not going directly to a company that makes something? I mean, obviously the people that are going to get hurt are going to be those who are in business for themselves and need to be able to buy this stuff from overseas. So I don't know. That's unfortunate. I'm going to skip here to this one. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to come back to that later. So, John, you brought up something about the iOS bricking the 4th generation Apple Watches. I didn't include this because I didn't think we're going to have enough time today, but apparently Apple or iPhones are allergic to helium. So I don't have the article sitting here in front of me right now, but there was someone who is operating an MRI, I think it was, MRI machine in a hospital, and they noticed that everyone who had an iPhone, which I thought you weren't supposed to use your phone in the hospital. That's what they always tell me. So everyone who had an iPhone suddenly had no service. Like their phones weren't working properly for some reason. And as they went around through the facility, they noticed that it was only Apple devices. All the Androids seemed to be working perfectly, which meant that anything that wasn't manufactured by Apple was not affected. Well, they traced this back to some sort of equipment. And I hope I'm right. It was either a MRI or a CT scan machine, one of those diagnostic tools that they use in a hospital. And something that they use to service this machine requires helium. And apparently there was a small helium leak that I guess no one noticed, and helium is odorless, so that's not difficult to imagine. But for whatever reason, the helium gas will affect iPhones and prevent them from functioning properly, which is bizarre. And it took an accident like this to find out, because obviously you're not going to test anything in an environment where there's helium. Why would you? That doesn't really, unless you're a balloon, maybe if you're a balloon animal maker or something, I don't know. But be careful if you have a leaking helium tank or you're around helium gas. Apparently your iPhone won't work. I don't know if that's true for tablets and laptops or MacBooks or anything else, but I thought that was kind of strange. Like, why of all things would helium affect someone's electronic device? It's bizarre. Let's see. All right, so let's move on here to this. This is just never going to go away, so I'm going to have to keep bringing it up because it's crazy. This is Motherboard. FCC falsely claims community broadband an ominous threat to the First Amendment. Okay, so we've been talking about net neutrality here for over a year and how the FCC is, for whatever reasons, set against allowing people to have control over their internet access. They would rather, it appears, they would rather have ISPs decide what you can get and how much you pay for it, dependent on what type of materials you choose to download, stream, or browse on the internet. So as an example, if you want to watch YouTube, you may not get the same speed on your internet as you would if you were watching, let's just say Netflix for argument purposes. Your ISP, now that we don't have net neutrality, they can say, well, we're going to let one of those run at full speed and the other one we're going to have to slow it down a little bit, unless you want to pay extra money or, whatever it is, for whatever reasons, which is an obvious concern. Because if you want to hurt the First Amendment, what you do is you control information and people's ability to express themselves through methods like this, where you have ISPs who are throttling content depending on where it comes from, right? Well, the FCC apparently turned around and said that is exactly what's going to happen if we create competition for ISPs. Does this make sense? So, an ominous threat to the First Amendment. This guy, which I know this is unfair. This is probably really a bad shot of him, but he doesn't look like, he doesn't have the traditional trustworthiness in his appearance, I think, that people might, if that makes sense. I know, it's probably unfair. It's probably got just a bad shot of him. The Trump FCC has declared towns and cities that that vote to build their own broadband networks an ominous threat to the First Amendment. Because there's nothing like having competition in the marketplace to threaten the First Amendment. That totally makes no sense. So this was given at a telecom-funded media institute, surprise, by FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly. So we already had Ajit Pai. Now we have to worry about this guy too. I'm starting to think that the whole organization has quite a few people that aren't looking out for the best interests of us, you and I. Here's the funny thing. More than 750 of these municipal networks have been built in the United States already because we don't want a monopoly. Studies have routinely, and I can't cite the source here. I don't think there's a link. Oh, actually there is a link. So if you look at the article, you can find what study it is they're talking about. Studies have routinely shown that these networks provide cheaper and better broadband service, and why wouldn't they? If you're trying to tell me that your local government is the one that you have to watch out for, I think there's a good argument to say that no, if I had to choose between the FCC and my local government at this point in time, I'm going to say that the FCC is the one that's not looking out for the best interests of citizens in this country. Just my opinion, of course. So O'Reilly subsequently tried to claim without evidence that encouraging such networks, which would increase competition and give us better pricing and better options, that these networks would somehow result in government attempts to censor public opinion. Really? So they've been doing this already apparently in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Wilson, North Carolina. Municipalities have been notorious for their use of speech codes in the terms and service of state-owned networks. Oh, that's interesting. Prohibiting users from transmitting content that falls into amorphous categories like hateful or threatening. Oh, so what you're trying to say, it sounds like, if I'm reading the article correctly, is that the free speech that this guy is worried about protecting is hateful and threatening content. So, okay. I don't think that's a good argument. And I don't think that we vote for these people, but we should. We should be able to vote them out. The closest O'Reilly gets to supporting evidence appears to be a 2015 white paper written by Professor Enrique Armijo that alleges standard telecom sector language intended to police threatening, abusive, or hateful language somehow implies community-run ISPs are more likely to curtail user speech. Okay, so his whole thing is that it sounds like you should be able to have all of the hateful and threatening speech you want to, and watch out because your local government may want to prevent you from doing that. So I think that is one of the exceptions to free speech, if I remember correctly. I may be wrong on the hateful part, but I'm pretty sure on the threatening part, you're not protected by the First Amendment. And if it's not already a law, I think we've got laws on the books now that do protect people from hate speech. I think. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's what's happening. Let's see. Let's back up here to the helium thing because I want to see your comments here. Helium is radioactive at some point. So you're telling me that my iPhone can't stand radiation and my Android can? Maybe that's the case, Johnny. Maybe the inner working of the iPhones are susceptible to radioactive discharge of some sort. Interesting. Could be. As for the helium, it was iPhone 6 and new phones and all Apple Watches because some of the internals are made out of quartz, which has a negative reaction to helium. Oh, interesting. Thank you for that. I did not know. So it must be the crystals then, I would imagine, right? That's the only thing I can think of that's made out of quartz, I believe. But it is very strange. Are the FCC misinterpreting faster with louder? At this point, I don't know what these guys are for, other than to serve the interest of big companies that offer broadband services. That's the only thing that I've been reading about lately that the FCC does is to help big cable. And the fact that they're getting tons of lobbying money from those industries kind of makes sense, right? But I mean, how long does this go on until people just say, okay, enough, or someone high up says this isn't okay. We shouldn't be taking advantage of consumers so that big companies can make more money, especially through legislation. I mean, that's not heading the wrong direction, people. I hope some of these guys go away and they're replaced with someone better. The FCC refused to comment on O'Reilly's claims when contacted by Motherboard, only referring them to O'Reilly's press office, which did not immediately respond for comment. Let's see. In Chattanooga, ISPs like AT&T and Comcast have been forced to dramatically reduce their pricing. Hear that? These guys have been forced to be competitive and reduce their pricing for gigabit broadband. For gigabit broadband in particular. Comcast was also forced to deploy significantly faster broadband in the city after it attempted to prevent the network from being built by filing several unsuccessful lawsuits. So you see how this works. There's a potential for competition. These guys try to file lawsuits to stop anyone from competing with them. And in the places where they were unsuccessful and the competition came in, they had to offer better connection speeds and lower pricing. That's kind of how it works. You get competition in the marketplace, and the customer is the one who benefits. And that is exactly what it looks like. Not only the big ISPs, but the FCC are trying to prevent, which is sad, really sad. A particular note, there are more than 21 states the broadband industry has lobbied to pass that greatly restrict your town or city's ability to build its own networks, even when nobody else will. Such laws are quite literally often written by the telecom industry, then usually proposed via proxy organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the same thing they do with political advertisements. When they want to get something passed, but they don't really want you to know who it is that's paying for the advertisement, they have some other third party or proxy company that says in the small print, this was funded by whatever organization this was, which if you look on public record, you can find out that there is a connection, but most people who watch the advertising never go that far. So this is just plain dirty, guys. I really hope that consumers win this one. I hope that these big companies get competition everywhere, and they have to start being reasonable about their business practices. We hope. Let's see. A threat is a totally different subject from voicing one's opinion. Totally unacceptable. Exactly. And it's certainly not protected by the First Amendment. And again, I do question, I'm not sure, again, because I'm not an attorney, but does the First Amendment protect people against hate speech? I'm not sure about that. I can remember at one point in time, I want to say it was the ACLU, got a lot of bad press because they were protecting the rights of free speech for white supremacists, which, most of us, I think most of us disagree with them and disagree with what they have to say, but I believe that they interpreted the letter of, the Constitution to the letter of the law as saying that you can say whatever you want. You can say, I don't like someone, I don't like something, even though it's hateful, even if, most people would say that's morally wrong. I think it's still protected, but there may be newer legislation now that protects people from hate speech. We certainly have, social media, YouTube, everyone else, Twitter, they all have policies in place that protect their users against hate speech. So that's fortunate, I think. A lot of times you just get kicked off the platform if that's how you're going to behave. I'm not sure if there's actually legislation that prevents that. There probably should be at this point, because the landscape has changed, and when you talk, a lot more people can hear you nowadays than before. Let's see. All those bottlenecks are just artificial roadblocks to encourage customers to pay for more premium plans. Agree 100%. All right, so let's move on here. We have two more real quick, and that is Apple. I don't get this, guys, but this is kind of funny. According to The Verge, Apple will reportedly launch a pilot program to repair devices as old as the iPhone 4S. Why? If this is true, if this is really happening, why would Apple want to start repairing old devices? I wonder if it could have anything to do with right to repair and bad press around not servicing their older devices, that people are saying, well, I don't have any alternative other than to go to a third party because Apple no longer services this device. Is that possible? Maybe. Just a thought. This could be a publicity thing, of course. So Apple is reportedly preparing a repair vintage Apple products pilot, according to 9to5Mac. So again, no confirmation on this, but they're saying that devices as old as 2011's iPhone 4S or a MacBook Pro from mid-2012 will be eligible for repair by Apple and its authorized service providers, and it will only cost you how much? I don't know. I could only imagine. Why would you want to go as far back as the iPhone 4S? That's the bigger question. I think you could probably stop at the 6, maybe the iPhone 5, but the 4S, I don't think anyone's going to pay to fix an iPhone 4S. Maybe they're just doing battery replacements. I'm not sure. Anyways, here's the list that they are reportedly planning to introduce as far as old devices into the repair program. Starting with the iPhone 5 GSM and CDMA, MacBook Air 11-inch and 12-inch from mid-2012, the iMac 21.5-inch and 27-inch from 2011. This is for the US and Turkey only. No idea why Turkey. On November 30th, the list will reportedly expand to include the iPhone 4S, the MacBook Pro 15-inch from 2012, and then finally in December 12th, they expand the program to cover the MacBook Pro Retina 13-inch, late 2012, early 2013, and mid-2012, also the Mac Pro 2012 and the iPhone 5 GSM. So if I read this correctly, they're going to, where's the 4S? Okay, so the 4S is going to be included in the program, according to the article, on November 30th, and then they're going to add the 5 on December 30th. So I don't know what this is about. Maybe having replacement parts on hand. But they just killed iPhone 5 repairs. Yeah, that's why I don't understand what this is about. First of all, what would be Apple's motivation to start repairing these older devices? And secondly, who's going to pay for this? I just get this feeling this is going to be one of those things. Look, we're doing the right thing. We have recyclable materials, which they're launching some new MacBook, I want to say, that's 100% recycled aluminum, if I remember correctly. So we're going to be the good guys, do the good thing for the environment. Look at us. We let you fix all your old phones so you don't have to take them anywhere else. That's the feeling that I get, because I can't think of any other reason that Apple would just out of the blue say, hey, we're going to start servicing old stuff that people don't want to pay ridiculous prices to have serviced. And that would be the second question, is what is it going to cost to get this stuff fixed? Because you would imagine that definitely when it comes to, and it does state in the article, that they are talking about authorized service centers, not just the Apple Store. Let me find the spot here. Not just the Apple Store. Oh, here it is. And it says earlier this week they proclaimed a new MacBook Air and MacBook Mini made from 100% recycled aluminum. So I don't know if that means like old beer cans or what, but okay. Where was the thing here? They said that they were going to extend this. Anyways, it was for their authorized service centers. Yeah, here we go. Prevents the company had lobbied against right to repair, blah, blah, blah. We know that. Restrictive repair policies. In any case, we know when it comes to their authorized repair centers, they can't do a whole lot in the way of repair. They can replace screens and batteries, if I remember correctly. So, not that anyone's going to be in a rush to start doing iPhone 4S screens again. And, what would you have to charge to repair this thing? You can get the screen is next to nothing now. They're what, like $5-10, I think? But you've got a good 20 minutes of labor minimum in changing out an iPhone 4S screen. So what are you going to charge somebody, and who's going to be willing to do this? And if you take it to Apple, I'm very curious to see what we would have to assume this is out of warranty repair, right? Or expired warranty repair. I don't know, but I'm suspicious. It doesn't make sense. I'll be shocked if this actually happens, but this is what they're saying. So according to 9to5Mac, that's the deal. Dig out your old iPhones and get ready to be shocked, sticker shock most likely, when they start telling you how much you're going to pay for it. Apple can still replace your iPhone 4 for $149. Is that the whole phone or the screen? That's crazy, because I wouldn't think they would have iPhone 4s. I mean, why would you do that? Does the iPhone SE fall into an iPhone 5 family because of its size, or the iPhone 6 because of its internals? Good question, Johnny, because I'm going to take a wild guess here. It's not on the list. So because there is no iPhone SE2, at least not yet, I wonder if they're just going to leave that one out completely. That would be interesting to know as well. The whole phone. So you can get a whole iPhone 4 for $150. So if you bring in, well, but this doesn't cover iPhone 4s. This covers 4S's. Why would you want an iPhone 4 at this point is my question, though. You know how it's going to run. It's going to be terrible. I guess if you're a collector, maybe. You remember these guys? They were kind of a headache to work on. All right, let's move here. So Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the internet. No, it wasn't Al Gore, apparently. But Tim Berners-Lee did have something to do with it, to the best of my knowledge. Saying that companies like Facebook and Amazon are too dominant and hold too much power. Again, father of the World Wide Web, for whatever that means. So tech giants like Google, Amazon, and Facebook may need to be broken up or risk new monopolies and duopolies forming unless challengers or changing tastes reduce their influence, Tim Berners-Lee has told Reuters. And I'm going to have to agree with this, not only for these companies, but let's include Apple and let's include all the big ISPs and really anyone who's in a position to have a monopoly or a duopoly or maybe even a triopoly, because once you get so big that you can squeeze out all the competition, obviously that's not going to be good for anyone except for you, the company. Baby Facebook, baby Googles, and baby Apples, that would be fun. It would be interesting, but there's a good argument here, I think. Once someone gets big enough, let's take an extreme example here, because I had this conversation recently also. Someone said that, when it comes to rent control, if you own a home and you want to rent it out, should you not be able to charge whatever you want to charge for rent? I mean, it's your house, right? If you're going to rent it, shouldn't you be able to charge whatever you want? And if somebody doesn't want to rent it out, that's their problem, right? So in some environments that might make sense, but let's take an extreme example. What happens, just hypothetically, if in one city or one area that someone lived in and they weren't able to move for some reason, they had to stay where they were at because of work, because of family, because of maybe a custody arrangement, you name it. They had to stay where they were. And somehow the bottom of the housing market dropped out and a bank came in and repossessed everyone's home, right? So one bank owns all the homes in this area. And they say, we're going to charge whatever we want to charge for rent. And if you don't like it, you don't have a place to live anymore. And you have to go somewhere else because that's just the way it is. There's an argument there, if you think about it, that says that doesn't seem okay, right? If you have no other place to go and your bank says, well, now your rent, which used to be $2,000 a month, is going to be $10,000 a month. Well, that's not practical for you, but, in a purely free market, we would say, well, too bad. That's how it works. Someone else can come in and pay the $10,000 a month. You have to move out. Well, if you're in a situation where you can't and there's no other place for you to go, you can see how having complete control of one thing is going to be a problem, because society cannot function if the cost of living is so high that the majority of the population cannot afford it anymore. And we see this in countries where that we don't want to see, the same situation here, right? If you look at third world countries where people can barely get enough to eat, not to mention having a place to live, and we've already seen, the homeless problem kind of starting up here because people in many cases don't have the money to pay for a place to stay. Think of the same thing happening with tech giants who control information and who control your access to services or to advertising or you name it. Again, with ISPs, they're basically your communication link to the outer world in many situations. So if one or two single companies become too powerful, they can make it very difficult for any competition to ever enter the marketplace. And, you can think of a lot of reasons why that would be a bad thing. So we certainly don't want to overregulate anyone to the point where they can't make a profit and they can't get more money for offering a better service. But if you're the only one in business, what motivation is there really for you to do your best and for you to continue to innovate when no matter what, the customer's coming to you? You're the only game in town. So he goes on to say that before breaking them up, we should see whether or not they are just disrupted by a small player beating them out of the market. What? Let me read this again. Before breaking them up, we should see whether they are not just disrupted by a small player beating them out of the market, but by the market shifting, by the interest going somewhere else. And he goes on a little bit more, but not too much about this. I am disappointed with the current state of the web. This is a guy who helped build the World Wide Web. We have lost the feeling of individual empowerment, and to a certain extent, also, I think the optimism has cracked, which is unfortunate. He proposed Mesh in 1989, rechristening it the World Wide Web, which used a graphical interface to read pages and hyperlinks to move between them in 1990. So, yeah, that's the dude right there. And that's what he thinks. And I think he's got some good points there. Especially when you look at someone like Facebook, who apparently was recently misled into thinking that they were selling advertising to... who was it? They were selling advertising to someone they weren't supposed to be, and they said, okay, cool. And they didn't catch any of it. Like, somebody posed... Who was it? I don't have to look this up. Now I'm going to forget. Facebook advertising. Let's see if it's in the news here. I just read something that I thought was crazy. And someone ran 2 fake ads pretending to be Cambridge Analytica, and Facebook failed to catch that they were frauds. This is on businessinsider.com. So even though they know that, let's see, Facebook's new political ad transparency tools allowed Business Insider to run adverts as being paid for by Cambridge Analytica, the political consultancy that dragged Facebook into a major data scandal this year. And there was one other one where there were something to do with politics where they weren't supposed to be doing the advertising, and they still did. So when you're that big and that powerful, what are you going to get besides a slap on the hand? In most cases, would be my guess. And then you continue doing what you're doing. So I think it would be great to have more competition for everyone. You know, that's generally that's the great thing about capitalism, right? You have a lot of people competing for your business, and whoever does the best work earns it. And when there's competition, people have choices. And lately, it seems like we're getting away from that on a lot of things. Pretty sad. Hopefully, that will change. As with all the baby bells and phone companies, something like Oppo and OnePlus spin off to offer different tiers for the same service or product. Technically, Samsung is baby Apple on steroids. What? Technically, Samsung is baby Apple on steroids. Yeah, sort of, I suppose. It's interesting. Someone else made a statement recently that said that Apple is doing away with, what was it? So they took the dongle out of the box on the MacBooks, and they did not include Bluetooth 5.0 on the latest MacBook, if I remember correctly, on the latest MacBook Pro. And someone was a whole bunch of people were complaining about it. And one of the comments in the bottom of the article said, it doesn't matter. They can take away whatever they want, and I hope that Apple continues to take things away, because there is a certain number of people who are going to buy their products no matter what. It really doesn't matter. It's going to happen. So that was it for the news. Guys, I want to go back up real quick. I know it's 7. Johnny, I know you're on the East Coast, and everyone else, if you got to go, I totally understand. But Nate, you had a question earlier, and maybe someone on here could jump in and answer. I want to say that there was an OTA dongle. I don't even have the comments on the screen here, guys. My bad. So I want to say, I'm scrolled way back up to the top here. And Nate was trying to recover some data on a Moto XT 1789 that does not have a display, right? So you can't see what's going on the screen. So isn't there an OTA dongle that will work with Androids in general, or is that specifically for Samsung? I don't know the answer to that. And is it display or is it touch? Right now I can't remember. I don't think I've actually had to use it because we've always ended up replacing the display instead. That is question number 1. Question number 2 is a message. Hold on one second here. Let me find it. Well, it is a message that I stored on my other phone. But if anyone happens to know, I am curious because I don't want to put it back on this thing. I'm working on an iPhone S8 Plus and trying to determine whether or not the speaker amp driver is required to boot the device. So let me pull it up here in the browser right quick. I think they have it, I'm sure they have it on micro soldering supply, and it is for an iPhone, unless somebody chimes in and answers my question first. Have anyone tried Android Debug Bridge for data recovery or fast boot instead? I have not, but maybe someone here has. So if we have, I think it's U5000, but let me double check here. Is it U5000? Where are you? It is the U5000 chip. So I'm actually looking at it here. And this is up right above and to the right of the PMIC on the back of the iPhone 8 Plus. And I'm working on one that was liquid damage, and when I took this thing off, it looked like it was covered in sand. So I think it got into a swimming pool or a spa, and you could see it was visibly discolored from the heat. And I suspect that it doesn't test as being shorted internally, but I suspect I don't want to put this particular one back on. However, I'm curious as to whether this would prevent the phone from booting or not. So if anyone knows that, feel free to leave a comment. Even if you watch this video later on and want to add that, I would be curious to know, because I'm really trying to avoid putting. I was real nervous about removing it in the first place because it's right on the opposite side of the processor, so obviously heat is a concern, and then having to go and put a new one on there, which is probably going to have non-leaded solder under it as well, I'm skeptical about. And this is a data recovery, so I'd really like to avoid even messing with that if I can. But the phone is not booting successfully at this point, and oddly enough, it has a couple open line, or one open line on one of the rear cameras, which is really bizarre. Hey, Oscar, what's going on? Just talking about Apple and phone stuff. But if you want to watch the replay, it should render pretty quick, hopefully. Let's see. MHL is the dongle you can use to display through HDMI, but you need the charging port to work. Okay, so Nate, I don't know if you're still watching. If not, I'll try to shoot a message to you later. But MHL apparently will display through HDMI output. Obviously, the charging port's got to be working, including the data connection. But if you get the display on with no touch, you can use OTG plug and use a mouse. That's what it was. Thank you. So Real World has answered that question. You can operate touch with an OTG dongle, but for the display, you're going to need MHL. They have sent, then have info sent to another phone or upload to a cloud service temporarily. You missed the world's first foldable phone. That's right. Does an iPhone boot with a headphone attached? I think that one is a lead. Does an iPhone boot, you mean without a headphone attached? Yes. But, okay. So, and you know, fair enough. That I'm probably looking in the wrong place. But I've ruled out just about everything else except for what I thought was low resistance on the PP underscore GPU line. So obviously when a phone does not boot up completely, it does not generate an image. This one goes to an Apple, stays there for a long time, probably a minute or 45 seconds to a minute or so. Then the amperage does spike at one point, and it almost maxes out on my power supply, but the voltage never drops. So I'm wondering if there's something that turns on during the boot process that does have a shorted line. And oddly enough, when I checked the PP underscore CPU and the, I'm going to go blank on the other one, the PP CPU E-Core, they both show low resistance when I'm testing with diode mode, but when I test for, when I check to see the ohms value, they both look like they've got sufficient resistance. So I'm kind of thrown off by that. So if I've got 6 ohms of resistance on PP underscore GPU, but when I test it in diode mode, I get 0.003, then I'm confused because I thought that 0.01 was about as low as you could get for a healthy GPU or CPU line, and that's the one that always throws everybody off. But I'm thrown off again because my diode measurements don't seem to agree with what I'm getting for ohm value. I don't know. When I inject voltage, it does pull amps from the power supply, but at a very low rate. So it's difficult to see, and obviously we don't want to push a lot of voltage through there. It's like a 0.8 volt line or 1 volt line, but it doesn't pull enough amperage to generate heat. However, when I boot the phone up, it does. And again, very hard to tell because it's so deep into the boot process that the freeze spray doesn't work. So if anyone has suggestions on that, shoot it my way. I think that's it though. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I'm going to log off here and then I will be back hopefully next Monday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if not, again, 6 o'clock, 8 p.m. Pacific. That is 9 p.m. on the East Coast, right? I think if I did my math right. And until then, you guys, all have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next time.